Rome in 750 looked grand only in memory. Her aqueducts still traced the sky, but half the arches were patched with timber. Her forums echoed more with goat bells than lawyers' pleas. Houses clustered inside ancient porticos, and vines snaked through marble capitals now serving as tethering posts for donkeys. On paper, she remained an outpost of the Byzantine Empire, yet the last imperial fleet that had sailed up the Tiber arrived 3 years earlier, and the gold coins that once paid the city watch were now spent defending Constantinople from Arab raids. No legion answered Roman signal fires. In everyday terms, Rome was running on improvisation. Town councilors senatores in title only collected tolls at the Milvian Bridge to keep the lamps of St. Peter's burning. Bakers stretched dwindling wheat reserves with chestnut flour. Monastic infirmaries treated malarial fevers brought on by the flooding Tiber. The city militia, perhaps 1,000 men at best, drilled in the Forum Botiorium with pikes of uneven length. When rain fell, they sheltered inside the shell of the baths of Caracalla and prayed their pay would come before their boots disintegrated. Welcome to Globe Threads, where we explore the defining moments that wove our world together. That vacuum had consequences. North of the Apennines, the Lombards' Germanic settlers, who had invaded Italy 2 centuries before, were tightening their grip. King Aistulf already ruled Patevia, Spoleto, and most of Emilia-Romagna. In 751, he captured Ravenna, capital of the Byzantine Exarchate, after breaching its marsh-lined causeway with floating siege towers. Ravenna's fall severed the land bridge that once linked Rome to the Adriatic, and more critically, to any realistic Byzantine relief. The Lombard frontier now stood barely a week's march from the Aurelian Walls. Refugees arrived in Rome bedraggled, clutching reliquaries or farm deeds rendered worthless overnight. The Byzantine court hardly noticed. Emperor Constantine V was consumed by Saracen raids on Cyprus, a Bulgarian revolt along the Danube, and by an internal campaign that alienated Rome, iconoclasm. Since 726, successive emperors had ordered the destruction of sacred images, icons, accusing their veneration of idolatry. In the Greek-speaking East, the policy met fierce but contained resistance. In Latin Italy, it sparked open revolt. Popes Gregory II and Gregory III convened local synods, condemned iconoclasm, and stopped dating their documents by the emperor's regnal year, a subtle but unmistakable sign of political distance. When Constantinople retaliated by seizing papal estates in Sicily and Calabria estates that produced olive oil and durum wheat, Rome's welfare grain and militia stipends vanished. The city was now morally estranged from its theoretical guardian, financially pinched, and physically undefended. Pope Zachary, an experienced diplomat who took office in 741, hoped to buy time. He persuaded Aistulf's predecessor, Liutprand, to return a few towns, but the relief proved temporary and expensive. Zachary also watched events beyond the Alps. In the Frankish realms, real power had shifted from the weary Merovingian line to their mayors of the palace, the Carolingians. The most capable of those mayors, Pepin, son of Charles Martel, commanded the loyalty of the Frankish army yet still bowed to a nominal king. Pepin needed legitimacy. Rome needed an army. The solution suggested itself even before anyone crossed the Alps. In 751, Zachary issued the decisive opinion that it was better for the man who held power to be called king than for a ceremonial king to reign without power. Frankish magnates promptly raised Pepin to the throne at Soissons. Archbishop Boniface of Mainz performed the anointing, the first time in Frankish history that a king was consecrated with holy oil. Yet Zachary died before he could cash in the favor. On the 15th of March, 752, Pope Zachary died, and the Roman clergy gathered in the Lateran Basilica to choose his replacement according to the custom per acclamationem public assent voiced by clergy, nobles, and people. Their first choice was a well-regarded priest named Stephen, son of a Roman judge called Constantine. He was elected on the 23rd of March and carried through the Forum to the Lateran amid hymns and incense. But 2 days later, on the eve of his episcopal consecration, the 50-year-old Pope-elect collapsed, most sources say, from a sudden stroke while inspecting pilgrims' offerings in the atrium of Old St. Peter's. He died that same night, the 25th of March, 752. Because canon law considered a man pope only after his episcopal ordination, this first Stephen technically never reigned. Medieval lists sometimes mark him with an asterisk or omit him altogether. Rome could ill afford a vacancy while Lombard troops prowled the countryside, so the electors reconvened without delay. On the 26th of March, they chose another Roman of senatorial stock, this time a deacon, likewise named Stephen. He was ordained priest and then consecrated bishop 5 days later, on the 31st of March, 752, thereby securing canonical legitimacy and immediate authority. This second Pope Stephen, now Stephen II, proved vigorous where his predecessor had been frail, politically astute where Zachary had been diplomatic, and determined to translate Zachary's moral alliance with the Franks into hard military fact. Stephen's first crisis erupted before the purple ink on his papal bull had dried. King Aistulf, elated by the conquest of Ravenna, proclaimed himself Rex Totius Italiae, king of all Italy, and dispatched heralds demanding that Rome pay an annual head tax and that the Pope publicly recognize Lombard overlordship. Lombard cavalry scouts rode down the Via Flaminia, forded the Aniene, and lodged arrows in the oak palisades on the Janiculum Hill. Shepherds fled with their flocks almost to the Ostian marshes. Stephen tried every conventional avenue before resorting to the unthinkable. He sent urgent letters to Emperor Constantine V in Constantinople, reminding the monarch of his oath to protect the Urbs Apostolica. The imperial chancery replied with theological sympathy, but no troops. Asia Minor needed every available tagma to face the caliphate. He then attempted direct diplomacy, traveling under safe conduct to Aistulf's court at Pavia in the late autumn of 753. The king received him with perfunctory honors, but the talks collapsed when Stephen refused to endorse Lombard sovereignty. Aistulf detained the pope for 40 days, hoping hunger and winter would soften Roman resolve. Released under heavy escort and warned never to seek Frankish aid, Stephen nevertheless chose precisely that course. No pope had ever voluntarily crossed the Alps. The only earlier pontiff to leave Italy, Martin I, had been hauled off in chains by imperial troops. The moral weight and personal risk were therefore enormous. Stephen's caravan set out in mid-December 753. The pope, his brother Paulus, a deacon at the time, a small Roman militia contingent, several Lombard hostages taken as surety, and the relic shrines of Saints Peter and Paul carried in cedar boxes. They went up the old Via Cassia, across the Cottian Alps by way of Mont Cenis. The Liber Pontificalis calls it Mons Seminus. Then through the upper Rhone valley toward Burgundy. Chroniclers note snow higher than the waist of a man on horseback. Stephen's gouty legs forced him onto a litter slung between two mules. When the path narrowed, clergy shouldered the poles and sang psalms. Psalm chapter 121 was favored. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills. Alpine herdsmen at the hospice of the Great Street Bernard exchanged bowls of warm curd and rye bread for a papal blessing and parchment indulgences. Despite frostbite, bandit rumors, and an avalanche that swept 2 pack animals into a ravine, the party descended into the Safona Plain on New Year's Day 754. At dusk on the 6th of January 754, the Feast of the Epiphany, Stephen reached the Frankish royal estate of Pantheon. King Pepin III rode out bareheaded in the snow, dismounted, and performed the triple prostration reserved for relics of the apostles. Chroniclers note that the Pope, still stiff from the litter, raised Pepin and kissed him on both cheeks, a gesture signaling that the Roman See and the Frankish throne now stood in covenantal parity. Within a week, the negotiations that would culminate in the donation of Pepin were underway. Stephen's unprecedented journey, half diplomatic masterstroke, half act of desperate faith, had transformed Rome's plight from regional siege to international question. It also revealed a new calculus for medieval power. When emperors failed, a pope could forge his own alliances, sanctify them with liturgy, and reshape the political geometry of Europe. Whatever Stephen expected, Pepin surpassed it. The king, accompanied by his queen Bertrada and a retinue of nobles, met the pope outside the gates, knelt, and kissed his sandals. The gesture sent a clear message to Frankish magnates wary of clerical interference. Royal might now partnered with apostolic authority. Over the following weeks at Pantheon and later at Quierzy, the two leaders shaped a compact that would redirect Western history. Stephen anointed Pepin and his sons, Carlo Mammon and the lanky teen Charles, with holy oil, declaring them kings by the grace of God. Such anointing borrowed Old Testament gravity. It also implied that future dynastic right flowed through the papal hand. Stephen then placed a small silk veil over Pepin's shoulders, symbolizing St. Peter's protection, a relic gesture normally reserved for bishops. In exchange, Pepin promised to march into Italy, drive back the Lombards, and restore a belt of territories not to the Byzantines who once owned them, but to St. Peter's See. Only the Pope could confer sacral kingship, and only a divinely favored king could wield the sword on Peter's behalf. Pepin wasted no time translating papal pleas into military reality. According to the Annales Regni Francorum, royal summonses went out before Lent 754, calling every able-bodied freeholder to assemble on the Upper Rhone by Easter of the following year. Modern estimates put the field force at roughly 20 to 25,000 infantry and 4 to 5,000 mailed cavalry, formidable numbers for the age, though precise figures are lost. In late April 754, the main column took the high road over Mont-Cenis. A lighter detachment under Count Ochar crossed the Mont Genèvre to threaten Lombard flanks. Chroniclers remark on machines of war the like of which Italy had not seen since the days of the Caesars. oak-framed battering rams tipped with iron bulls' heads, wheeled mantelets faced with raw calf skin to resist flaming arrows, a handful of traction onagers, each requiring 40 men on the windlass. Ommux teams from Burgundy dragged these pieces across frozen Alpine frah. Guides would cut steps in the ice so the wheels would not skid into ravines. On the 13th of May, the advance guard descended into the Susa Valley. Aistulf's scouts, convinced the passes were still snow-choked, were caught drilling outside the town walls. Frankish cavalry long lances couched underarm, stirrup leverage unknown to most Italians, broke the Lombard screen in one charge, seizing the gatehouse before the portcullis could drop. Pepin paused only long enough to gather supplies and push a pontoon bridge across the Dora Riparia, then drove straight for the Ticino plain. By the first week of June, the Frankish army encircled Pasivia, capital and pride of the Lombard kingdom. The city's brick ramparts were strong, but its granaries were built for peacetime, and its riverborne supply line lay under Frankish arrow shot. Pepin did not assault. He starved. He established 4 fortified camps on the cardinal roads, linked by patrol routes. Every monastery in the surrounding countryside, San Pietro in Ciel d'Oro, San Michele alla Pusterla, was required to furnish weekly grain levies to the besiegers. Contemporary Lombard sources speak of wheat at 1 solidus themodius, famine pricing that emptied civic coffers in a month. By mid-July, dysentery and desertion thinned the Lombard ranks. Around June 754, Aistulf rode out under truce to Pepin's tent, pitched near the Basilica of St. John Domnarum. There he paid a war indemnity reckoned at 12,000 solidi in gold and plate, swore 3 oaths by relics, by his battle standard, and by the host, that he would restore all former Byzantine territories, from sea to sea to the Apostolic See, delivered hostages, among them his 2 adolescent nephews, to guarantee compliance. Pepin allowed the Lombard king to keep Pajuvia and his title, but exacted a promise never again to menace Rome. Stephen II, waiting at Vercelli with papal chaplains, received word of the victory and offered a public Te Deum. The Frankish host then escorted the Pope back toward Rome, garrisoning way stations along the Via Flaminia to demonstrate that the negotiation had the weight of mailed fists behind it. But the ink was hardly dry before the Lombard king reneged. Pepin returned in 756, this time with siege towers and an artillery corps firing stone shot the weight of wine barrels. Pavia endured 6 weeks before Aistulf capitulated under harsher terms. Envoys from Ravenna, Rimini, Ancona, and half a dozen other cities surrendered their keys to the Frankish king, who in turn carried them to Rome. A Byzantine embassy, incredulous, shadowed the Frankish camp with chests of gold hoping to reclaim the exarchate. Pepin met them politely, accepted their gifts as tribute, and refused their proposal. Inside St. Peter's Basilica, beneath a vast silver canopy donated by Emperor Constans II a century earlier, Pepin laid a parchment and the city keys on the apostles' tomb. The act, later called the donation of Pepin, ceded the exarchate of Ravenna and the coastal Pentapolis to the papacy. Contemporary Frankish annals record Pepin's public explanation. He fought for the love of Peter and the safety of the church, not for imperial favor. The alliance now had military teeth, theological polish, and legal documentation. The Pope was suddenly a sovereign prince. The new papal states were a patchwork segments of Emilia-Romagna, stretches of the Via Flaminia, fingers of hill country around Perugia, but they yielded taxes, tolls, and recruits. Stephen minted bronze filari bearing Peter's name. Their crude portraits traveled as far as trading fairs in Lyon. Papal legates divided the territory into patrimonia, estates, each obliged to supply grain to Rome and men to local garrisons. At Narni and Civita Castellana, engineers reinforced crumbling gates with recycled marble sarcophagi, a cheap but effective bulwark against Lombard raiders still lurking in the hills. Rome itself saw a civic revival. Aqueduct arches were rebuilt with brick facing. The city grain dole resumed, though now sourced from new estates in the Po Valley. And a census of clerics recorded 28 urban deaconries tasked with distributing alms, a system that remained in place into the High Middle Ages. For the papacy, the transformation was exhilarating and perilous. Independence from Byzantium severed the last threads of Eastern oversight and widened the theological gulf iconoclasm had opened. But ruling territory entangled the pontiff in Italian power politics, family feuds, tax revolts, border skirmishes. By the 760s, popes were arbitrating disputes among Tuscan counts and dispatching armed tenants to quell banditry in the Sabina. Land, it turned out, generated lawsuits as easily as harvests. Still, in the calculus of the 750s, political risk was preferable to Lombard conquest or imperial neglect. For the Franks, the alliance paid immediate dividends. Pepin's dynasty could claim its crown was christened by Peter himself. In royal charters, the king began calling his warriors defenders of the Roman Church, fusing tribal identity with Christian mission. Carolingian propagandists wrote poems likening Pepin to the Old Testament King David, anointed, repentant, and victorious. Monks from Fulda to Reims copied the story of the donation, underlining the notion that the Franks, not the Byzantines, were now the chosen sword arm of Western Christianity. Frankish bishops cited the alliance to standardize liturgy with Roman usage, sending choir masters to learn the chants sung in the Lateran Basilica. Constantinople, meanwhile, faced a strategic nightmare. Central Italy, once its forward defense, was now governed by a pope who openly condemned imperial theology and protected by Frankish spears. Emperor Constantine V lodged formal protests and tightened iconoclastic enforcement, but wars on three fronts left no spare legion to sail west. Eastern chroniclers began referring to the pope simply as the Roman priest, conceding by omission that political authority in the old capital no longer belonged to Constantinople. Cross-Alpine travel quickened. Frankish pilgrims flocked to Rome for Easter. Papal envoys rode north advising on church reform. They carried sacramentaries, the liturgical books of the Roman Mass, that would blend with Gallican melodies and evolve into what scholars now call Gregorian chant. Frankish scribes adopted clear, round letterforms they saw in Roman chancery archives. Those forms became Carolingian minuscule, the ancestor of our modern lowercase script. What began as military alliance was already blossoming into a shared cultural language. By 770, the new order was visible everywhere. Papal correspondence no longer listed the emperor first, but the Frankish king. Frankish annalists started the practice of dating events by the Anno Domini reckoning rather than imperial regnal years, a subtle sign that universal authority had migrated. Icon painters in Rome felt safe to display their craft again. They called the surviving mosaics Peter's defense against the image breakers. Lombard power, though still dangerous, was contained and would be extinguished altogether when Pepin's towering son Charlemagne crossed the Alps one last time in 774. The alliance also set a precedent whose echoes would ring for centuries. Spiritual authority could legitimize secular rule, and secular force could enlarge spiritual independence. The Pope, who once waited for an emperor's approval to be installed, had proven he could make kings and claim land. Conversely, a Western king had discovered that anointing by Rome conferred a charisma no tribal election could match. The stage was ready for bigger dramas: a Christmas coronation in 800, medieval contests between popes and emperors, even the later idea that Europe itself was a single Christian commonwealth. Yet all those milestones rested on the gritty, improvised decisions of this 20-year window. A pope who preferred Alpine blizzards to Lombard subjugation, a Frankish ruler who traded steel for sanctity, and an empire in the east so distracted that it let the old capital slip. When Stephen II died in 757, a Roman diarist carved a line above a side altar near the Lateran. Peter has found new soldiers and Rome new life. From that moment forward, the map of Latin Christendom would be drawn not by the oars of Byzantine galleys, but by the rhythm of Frankish hooves, and by the steady, diplomatic hand of a papacy that had discovered power, judiciously wielded, was not incompatible with piety.